My name is Clara Monroe. For the first 32 years of my life, I believed that name was a simple label, a quiet melody in the grand orchestra of my family. I now understand it as a story, one I am only just learning to tell myself. I live in Portland, Oregon, a city of soft rain and defiant roses, where the air smells of damp earth and coffee. For the past 4 years, I've worked as a nurse at a community health clinic, a job that pays my bills, but, more importantly, feeds a part of my soul that craves connection and purpose. My world, however, truly revolves around my son, Finn. He is 5, a whirlwind of boundless energy and profound questions, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a spirit as bright as a supernova. Being his mother, his only parent, is the single most defining, challenging, and breathtakingly beautiful fact of my existence. Our story, or at least this chapter of it, begins on a November morning painted in the somber, beautiful hues of a Pacific Northwest autumn. The sky was a pearlescent gray, and a fine mist hung in the air, clinging to the fiery leaves of the Japanese maples and the deep green needles of the Douglas firs that lined the streets. Finn, bundled in a bright blue raincoat, held my hand tightly, his small fingers a warm anchor in the cool, damp air. We were on our way to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. "Are we almost there, Mama?" Finn's voice, small and clear, cut through the quiet hum of the suburban street. He tilted his head back, his hood falling away to reveal a face full of earnest anticipation. "Almost, sweet boy." "Just past that big fir tree with the crooked branch," I answered, my voice softer than I intended. A smile touched my lips, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. These family gatherings, once the bedrock of my year, had begun to feel like walking on fragile ice. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Monroe, lived in a pristine 2-story colonial in Lake Oswego, a world away from my modest, but cozy bungalow in the city. Their home was a testament to my father's success in corporate finance: perfectly manicured lawn, a facade of stately gray stone, and windows that gleamed even under the overcast sky. It was beautiful, but it had always felt more like a showroom than a home, a place where emotions were kept as tidy as the rose bushes lining the walkway. The heavy oak door swung open before we even reached the top step. My father, Richard, stood framed in the doorway, a tall man whose posture never seemed to relax. His smile was wide, but didn't soften the sharp, assessing look in his eyes. "Clara, Finn. There you are." We were beginning to wonder. He stooped to lift Finn, who launched himself into his grandfather's arms with a squeal of delight. The genuine affection between them was a balm to my anxious heart, a reminder of the good that still existed here. "Hi, Dad." From the depths of the house, my mother's voice floated out, laced with a familiar, theatrical warmth. "Clara, darling, is that you?" "I'm wrestling with this turkey. It's a monster this year." "I can help, Mom," I offered, shrugging off my damp coat and hanging it on the brass hall tree. "Nonsense," Eleanor said, emerging from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a crisp, embroidered apron. She was still a handsome woman, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her movements graceful and deliberate. "You work so hard all week. You deserve a day to put your feet up. Family is what matters. Having my whole family together, it's the greatest gift." She pulled me into a brief, papery hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and roasting poultry. The living room was immaculate, dominated by a large, unlit fireplace and walls adorned with professionally taken family portraits. In the most prominent spot, above the mantelpiece, was a framed photo of my grandmother, Madeline. She had passed away 8 months ago, and her absence was a physical ache in the room, a silence where her vibrant, knowing laughter used to be. Madeline had been my person. My anchor, my champion, my truest north. My mother followed my gaze. "Grandma Madeline would have loved to see this," she said, her voice taking on a wistful tone. "She was always so proud of you, Clara. Thank you again for everything you did for her in those last years. With your father's work and my commitments, we just couldn't be there as much as we wanted. You were a saint." A faint, bitter taste rose in my throat, which I quickly swallowed. A saint. That was the word they used. It felt less like a compliment and more like a convenient label for the daughter who had shouldered the entirety of my grandmother's end-of-life care. I had spent nearly every day of her final 2 years at her bedside, reading to her, changing her linens, holding her hand through the long, painful nights. My parents' visits were fleeting, filled with strained pleasantries and quick glances at their watches. But the time with Madeline had been a sacred gift. In her fading days, she had given me a lifetime of wisdom, and I would not trade a single moment of it. "Finn, my boy, how would you like to be Grandpa's official gravy stirrer?" Richard's voice boomed, pulling me from my thoughts. Finn, ever eager for a grown-up job, nodded vigorously. As I watched my father lead my son into the kitchen, a familiar wave of gratitude washed over me, momentarily soothing the undercurrent of resentment. For all their flaws, they loved Finn. That had to count for something. It had to be enough. Later that afternoon, after a whirlwind of helping and being shooed away, Finn's energy finally waned. He fell asleep on my mother's lap, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "Time for a nap," Eleanor whispered, her expression softening as she looked at her grandson. I carried him upstairs to the guest room, a space so sterile and unused it felt like a hotel. After tucking him under a heavy damask comforter, I stood for a moment, listening to the quiet house. When I returned downstairs, my parents were sitting on the plush cream sofa, sipping sherry from delicate crystal glasses. "This is what it's all about," my father said, gesturing around the room with his glass. "A day like today, all of us together. It's a blessing. It truly is." I looked out the large picture window at the garden. The mist had thickened into a soft, steady drizzle, blurring the edges of the world into a watercolor of gray and gold. I could hear the distant, happy shouts of another family from a house down the street, and a profound loneliness settled over me. We were together, but I had never felt more alone. At 6 o'clock, we gathered in the dining room. The long mahogany table was set with the family's finest china and silver, glowing under the soft light of the crystal chandelier. The air was thick with the rich, savory aromas of Thanksgiving, the perfectly browned turkey my mother had indeed wrestled into submission, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole with crispy onions, herbed stuffing, and a glistening bowl of crimson cranberry sauce. My father stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped before him. "Let us give thanks," he began, his voice taking on a formal, solemn tone. "For another year of health, for the blessings of this family, and for the bounty before us." We all bowed our heads. I felt Finn's small, warm hand slip into mine, his fingers squeezing mine in a serious imitation of prayer. A fierce, protective love for him swelled in my chest, so powerful it almost hurt. "Now," my mother said brightly, once the prayer was finished, our little tradition. "Let's each say what we're most grateful for this year." She began, as always. "I am grateful, of course, for my wonderful husband and for our family's health. And I am so deeply proud of our Clara, working so hard as a nurse and raising that beautiful boy all on her own. It's an inspiration." My father nodded, clearing his throat. "I'm grateful for another successful year and for the prospect of a comfortable retirement not too far down the road. But most of all," he said, his eyes crinkling as he smiled at Finn, "I'm grateful for this little man. Being a grandfather is the greatest joy of my life." Finn, basking in the attention, puffed out his chest. "I'm grateful for my Legos," he announced, "and for Grandpa and Grandma, and for my mama." Warmth spread through me, a genuine, uncomplicated glow. I held his hand a little tighter. When it was my turn, I spoke quietly, my gaze drifting towards the window where the evening had drawn a dark curtain over the rain-soaked world. "I'm grateful for Finn, always. I'm grateful for my work and for my health. Anne, I miss Grandma Madeline, but I'm so grateful for the time I had with her. She taught me so much about what's truly important." The meal began, and for a while, everything felt normal. My father carved the turkey with practiced precision. My mother fussed over our plates, ensuring everyone had a bit of everything. Finn attempted to build a dam out of mashed potatoes, earning a gentle reprimand from me and chuckles from his grandparents. He reminds me so much of you at that age, Clara, Eleanor said, a nostalgic smile playing on her lips. You were always such a thoughtful child, always looking out for the smaller kids on the playground. It's no wonder you became a nurse. It's in your blood to care for people. Madeline used to say that, my father added, pouring himself a generous glass of red wine. She'd say that Clara has a core of steel, but it's wrapped in velvet. She always did have a soft spot for you. A subtle tension entered his voice with the mention of her name. A wire pulled taut that only I seemed to feel. I just smiled and took a sip of water. Grandma believed in me, I said softly. That was a gift. As the main course plates were cleared, my mother stood up, her face alight with excitement. And now, for the grand finale, she announced. I made Grandma Madeline's special spiced apple cake. The one with the salted caramel drizzle. She returned from the kitchen bearing a magnificent cake on a crystal stand. It was beautiful, a golden brown bundt cake elegantly laced with a thick, glistening caramel sauce. The scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and warm apples filled the room, a smell so deeply tied to my childhood and my grandmother that it made my heart ache. I found her old, handwritten recipe card when I was clearing out some of her things, my mother explained, her voice thick with emotion. I followed it to the letter. It felt like she was right there in the kitchen with me. It's beautiful, Mom, I said, and I meant it. She sliced the cake with a silver knife, placing generous portions on dessert plates. Finn got a small sliver, his eyes wide with anticipation. My piece was placed before me, the caramel catching the light like liquid amber. I took a bite. The cake was moist and fragrant, the spices perfectly balanced. The caramel was sweet with that perfect hint of salt. It tasted like love. It tasted like memory. It's incredible, Mom. It tastes just like I remember. I'm so glad, she said, beaming with pride. A little bit of love is always the secret ingredient, isn't it? We moved to the living room, pleasantly full and lulled by the food and wine. The fire had been lit, casting a warm, flickering glow across the room. Finn, sleepy and content, curled up on my lap, his head resting against my chest. This was a lovely day, I said, meaning it in that fractured way one means things in complicated families. The moments of grace were real, even if they were fleeting. Thank you, Dad, Mom, for everything. Of course, darling, my mother said. We're family. We have to take care of each other. Blood is thicker than water, my father added, swirling the last of his wine in his glass. His eyes were unfocused, staring into the flames. In the end, it's the only thing that truly matters. It was perhaps 20 minutes later that I felt the first strange sensation. A wave of dizziness, subtle at first, like standing up too quickly. Then, a peculiar tightness in my chest, a feeling that a cold, heavy hand was slowly squeezing my lungs. I tried to take a deep, steadying breath, but the air seemed to catch in my throat. I shifted on the sofa, trying to discreetly ease the pressure. I think I ate too much, I murmured, putting a hand to my sternum. Are you all right, dear? My mother asked. Her brow furrowed with concern, but her eyes, for a split second, held a different expression. A flicker of something sharp, watchful, and utterly devoid of warmth. Just then, Finn whimpered on my lap. Mama, my tummy hurts, he whispered, his face suddenly pale and clammy. He clutched at his stomach, his small body tensing. Finn. I tried to sit up, to gather him closer, but a profound weakness was spreading through my limbs, turning them to lead. My vision began to swim, the edges of the room blurring and dissolving into the firelight. Breathing was no longer an unconscious act, it was a desperate, manual effort. You both look dreadfully pale, my father observed, rising slowly from his chair. His movements were unhurried, almost languid, a stark contrast to the emergency unfolding before him. Suddenly, Finn's body went limp. He slid from my lap onto the thick Persian rug with a soft thud. His eyes were half-closed, his breathing shallow and frighteningly rapid. A primal scream of terror clawed at my throat, but I couldn't make a sound. Call 911, I managed to force out, the words a ragged, broken whisper. My throat felt as if it were closing completely. Oh, my heavens, what could it be? My mother's voice was high and panicked, but it was the panic of a stage actress, not a mother or grandmother watching her family collapse. She wrung her hands, but made no move towards the phone. My mind, though hazy and struggling for oxygen, was still a nurse's mind. It was screaming alarms. This wasn't food poisoning. This was something fast, systemic, and deadly. My body refused to obey, but a small, cold part of my brain was still analyzing, calculating. I saw Finn's little hand twitch on the rug, a small, desperate gesture. I tried to crawl to him, to offer the useless comfort of my touch, but my muscles were unresponsive. I was trapped inside a failing machine. And then, through the fog of my fading consciousness, I heard their voices, low and clear, no longer meant for my ears. "It's working faster than I expected," came my father's voice. It was stripped of all its previous warmth, now flat and cold as slate. "The dosage was precise," my mother replied, her tone equally chilling, a pragmatic, businesslike whisper. "Without them, Madeline's estate reverts to us. The codicil is nullified if the primary beneficiary and their issue predecease the transfer." The words pierced through my delirium. The inheritance. Madeline's will. My grandmother had left the bulk of her considerable estate, her historic home in the Pearl District, a portfolio of sustainable investments, a charitable trust, all told worth several $1,000,000 to me. She had provided a generous, but pointedly smaller, stipend for her own son and his wife. "That stubborn old woman," my father muttered, the venom in his voice a shocking contrast to his earlier nostalgic pronouncements. "Leaving everything to her. To a bleeding heart nurse." As if I, her own son, who built a life she could be proud of, meant nothing. "She never appreciated you, Richard," Eleanor soothed. "But it doesn't matter now. This will solve everything. The debts. We'll be free." Debts. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of such grotesque betrayal that my heart constricted with more than just the poison. I was on the floor now, my cheek pressed against the scratchy wool of the rug. I could see Finn's still form, his chest barely moving. My son. My beautiful, innocent son. "Should we call the ambulance soon?" Eleanor's voice held a sliver of anxiety. "The timing has to be right. We find them, we're distraught. It's a tragic accident." "Another 5 minutes," Richard commanded. "We have to be sure. No loose ends." Despair, black and absolute, threatened to swallow me whole. But as I looked at Finn, a tiny, defiant ember began to glow in the darkness. Madeline's voice echoed in my memory, from a conversation we'd had just weeks before she died. "Your parents love the idea of family, Clara," she had said, her voice thin but her eyes sharp as ever. "But they love money more. Be careful, my dear. A wolf can wear a sheep's skin for a very long time." I hadn't wanted to believe her. I had clung to the hope that she was wrong, that her illness had made her cynical. But she had seen the truth I had refused to see. And I had prepared for it. The dizziness was real. The tightness in my chest was real. But they were the symptoms of a battle being fought inside me, not a surrender. 2 days ago, after noticing a search history for fast-acting, untraceable toxins on my father's home office computer during a visit to drop off a book, a cold dread had settled in my bones. Madeline's warning had become a siren. Drawing on my medical knowledge, I had begun a quiet protocol. For 48 hours, I had been giving both myself and Finn small, disguised doses of a potent medical-grade adsorbent, a compound designed to bind with and neutralize certain poisons in the digestive tract. It wasn't a perfect shield, but it was a fighting chance. And the cake. The beautiful, treacherous apple cake. While helping my mother in the kitchen earlier, fetching the vanilla from the pantry, I had performed a swift, seamless switch. I had baked an identical cake the night before, a perfect copy in every way but one. It was innocent. The cake my mother had so lovingly presented, the one with the special caramel drizzle she'd prepared separately and added at the last minute, was now sitting, half-eaten, on the kitchen counter. The slices she had served herself and my father had come from her own creation. I had made sure of it, guiding her hand with a simple, "Oh, let me get those for you. You've done so much already." They hadn't poisoned us. They had poisoned themselves. My body was still struggling against the small amount of toxin that had breached my defenses, but the leaden paralysis was beginning to recede, replaced by a tingling weakness. I focused all my remaining strength on Finn. A faint groan escaped my lips. I saw his eyelids flutter. "Stay with me, my love. Just stay with me." I thought I heard the faint, distant wail of a siren, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or just a wishful phantom in the roaring of my own ears. My parents' voices faded as their own metabolic clocks ticked down. My last coherent thought before a wave of genuine exhaustion pulled me under was of the 911 call I had made from the upstairs bathroom an hour earlier, a quiet, anonymous tip about a domestic disturbance and shouts from the Monroe residence. A precaution. A loose end of my own. The first thing I registered was the color white. A vast, sterile, acoustic-tiled ceiling. The second was the smell of antiseptic, a scent as familiar to me as my own skin. The third was the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. I was in a hospital bed. I turned my head, a sharp pain lancing through my neck. In the bed next to mine, small and surrounded by a web of wires and tubes, was Finn. He was sleeping, his face peaceful, his chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. The sight of it, the simple, beautiful fact of his breathing, broke something open inside me, and silent, hot tears streamed down my temples into my hair. He was alive. We were alive. Welcome back. A man in a blue scrubs and a white coat stood at the foot of my bed, holding a tablet. He had kind, tired eyes. "I'm Dr. Lin. You and your son were brought in about 8 hours ago. You're very lucky. We found aconitine in your systems, a highly toxic alkaloid. It was a near-lethal dose." Aconitine. Monkshood. A poisoner's classic. Fast, brutal, and often mistaken for a cardiac event. My father had been thorough. Before I could form a response, the door to the private room opened, and 2 people entered. A man and a woman, dressed in plain clothes that did nothing to hide their profession. "Detectives." "Ms. Monroe," the man said, his voice gentle but firm. He was older, with a weary face that had seen too much. "I'm Detective Grant. This is Detective Kim. We need to ask you some questions if you feel up to it." I nodded, my throat raw. I tried to sit up, and a nurse rushed to help, propping pillows behind me. First, Detective Grant began, his expression somber. "I'm very sorry to have to tell you this. Your parents, Richard and Eleanor Monroe, they didn't make it. They were deceased when the paramedics arrived." I covered my face with my hands, and this time, the sob that escaped me was utterly real. It was a gut-wrenching, ragged sound, torn from a place of profound and complicated grief. I was not grieving the people who had tried to murder my child. I was grieving the parents I had once loved, the family I had desperately tried to believe in. I was grieving the death of a beautiful lie. "We found them in the living room with you," Detective Kim continued, her voice professional but not unkind. "From the initial toxicology reports and the evidence at the scene, it appears the poison was concentrated in a salted caramel sauce that was served on a dessert cake." My parents?" I asked, my voice trembling. I looked from one detective to the other, my eyes wide with carefully crafted disbelief. "But why? It makes no sense." "We're still piecing together the motive, Ms. Monroe," Detective Grant said, his gaze sympathetic. "But we've discovered that your parents were in severe financial distress. And we've also been made aware of the contents of your grandmother Madeline's will. You're the primary beneficiary of a very substantial estate." "The inheritance?" I said, feigning confusion. I knew Grandma left me something, but I didn't know the details. "The running theory," Detective Kim explained, consulting her notes, "is that your parents plan to poison you and your son to gain control of the inheritance. It seems that, in the process, they tragically ingested the poison themselves. A terrible, miscalculated murder-suicide." I wiped my eyes, a single, grateful tear for Madeline's foresight mixing with the tears of feigned shock. She had seen it all. She had known. "I can't believe it," I whispered. "They were my parents. We were family." "Money does terrible things to people," Detective Grant said, his voice laced with a weary resignation. "The important thing is that you and your son are safe. You have a chance to start over. A week later, Finn and I were discharged. The story had made the local news. Thanksgiving tragedy in Lake Oswego. Prominent couple dies in botched poisoning plot. We were painted as the innocent, grieving victims, a portrayal I did nothing to discourage. The sympathy from the community was a protective cloak, shielding me from any lingering questions. The meeting with my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, was a quiet, somber affair. He read the will, his voice steady. The numbers were staggering, enough to ensure that Finn and I would never have to worry about money again. But it was Madeline's own words, in a personal addendum, that undid me. To my darling Clara, Mr. Sterling read, I leave not just my worldly possessions, but my faith in you. You have a quiet strength that your parents mistook for weakness. You understand that true wealth is not in a bank account, but in a heart capable of fierce, protective love. Use this gift to build a life of peace and purpose for yourself and for my great-grandson, Finn. Live beautifully. That will be my greatest legacy. I wept in the lawyer's office, my face in my hands. They were tears of gratitude, of release, of a profound and abiding love for the woman who had seen me, truly seen me, until the very end. 6 months passed. Spring came to Portland, painting the city in vibrant strokes of pink cherry blossoms and electric green leaves. I had sold my parents' house and my grandmother's condo. With a portion of the inheritance, I bought a lovely old craftsman bungalow in a quiet, leafy neighborhood. It had a deep front porch with a swing and a large, sun-dappled backyard where Finn could run and shout and be a little boy, safe from the world's shadows. I kept my job at the clinic, reducing my hours to be more present for Finn. The work grounded me, reminded me of the simple, profound goodness of helping others. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace, of lightness. The hypervigilance that had been my constant companion for years was finally beginning to recede. One Saturday afternoon, as I was on my knees in the garden, showing Finn how to plant tomato seedlings, the doorbell chimed. I opened the door to find an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, a man I recognized from photographs. Miss Monroe? Clara, he said. My name is Dr. Garrison. I was your grandmother Madeline's physician for many years. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach, but I smiled and invited him in. We sat on the porch swing, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, the chains creaking a gentle rhythm. I've come because Madeline entrusted something to me, he said, reaching into his worn leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with wax. She gave this to me the week before she passed. She told me, if Clara is ever in danger from her parents, and if she survives it, give this to her. She'll know what it means. My hands trembled as I took the letter. I broke the seal and unfolded the pages, my grandmother's elegant, spidery handwriting covering the paper. My dearest Clara, it began. If you are reading this, then my deepest fears have come to pass, and you have faced the wolf. I am so sorry I could not protect you from this, but I knew I had to let you find your own strength. I saw the darkness in my son and his wife, their greed and their envy of the light in you. I knew they might one day try to extinguish it. But I also knew you were not a lamb to be led to slaughter. You are a lioness. You are my granddaughter. Whatever you did to protect yourself and my precious Finn, know this. You did the right thing. Survival is not a sin. Protecting your child is the most sacred duty there is. I am with you always. Tears blurred the words. She knew. She had known what I was capable of, what I might be forced to do. She had given me her blessing, her absolution, from beyond the grave. Dr. Garrison watched me, his expression full of a deep, knowing compassion. I was her doctor for 30 years, Clara. I saw her heart break over her son. I also saw how much she loved you. When I heard the news of what happened on Thanksgiving, and that you and the boy survived while they did not, I understood. The air grew still. The sounds of the neighborhood faded away. What are you saying, doctor? I whispered, my voice barely audible. He reached over and patted my hand, his touch gentle and paternal. I'm saying that justice takes many forms. I'm saying that a mother's love is the most powerful force on this earth. And I am saying that I am an old man who respected his patient's final wishes. Her wish was for you to be free. For the first time since that terrible night, I allowed myself to fully break. The guilt I had walled off, the fear, the horror, and the fierce, terrible righteousness of my actions all came pouring out in a flood of tears. Dr. Garrison simply sat with me, a silent, steady presence, until the storm passed. "Live a good life, Clara," he said softly as he stood to leave. "For Finn. For Madeline. Fill this house with laughter." That's all the testament she would ever want. That night, after I tucked Finn into bed, I stood in my quiet living room and looked at the photo of Madeline on the mantelpiece. She was younger in this one, her smile vibrant, her eyes full of life. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that family is not an obligation defined by blood. It is a choice, a sacred pact. It is the people you fight for, the ones who see your light and stand with you in the darkness. It is the relationships built on a foundation of unconditional love and fierce protection. "Mommy, can we build a fort in the backyard tomorrow?" Finn's voice called from his room, sleepy and sweet. I went to his doorway and smiled. "We can build the biggest fort in the whole world, my love." He was my true north. He was my family. And our new life, a life purchased at a terrible cost, but rooted in a love that had proven stronger than death, was just beginning.